Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. All right. Round number 6, last round of Swiss here at the BOP tournament. Standard 1K. Top 8 are going to be splitting that $1,000 prize pool as we look at our feature match for round number 6. And we have Lee Matthews on the lower half of your screen with some very exciting cards, although unfortunately going down a little bit to 5 with Duelist of the Mind, Evangel Synthesis, Tidebinder, Bitter Triumph, Axelzar. So this is Dimir Midrange, but it's kind of an interesting take here on Dimir Midrange, Arya, playing Invasion of Amonkhet along with Pros Eidetic Memory and a bunch of these cool valley creatures.
Yeah, we've seen a few versions of this Dimir deck that, rather than focusing on just the normal Dimir mid-rangey thing, is trying to leverage some of these draw multiple cards a turn synergies. And really interested to see how they pan out against a more assertive deck like Toxic, like Boros Convoke, and whether not having those that mid-range interactive game as much hurts the deck and prevents its ability to play a fair game in a way that normally lines up pretty well against Convoke.
Well, Lee is a little bit on the back foot, having had to take a couple of mulligans, but he was on the play, so let's see what he can do here. Max on the other side of the battlefield with Epicure and Warden down already. Oh, and Gleeful Demolition. It may not be toxic, but that is pretty toxic behavior, Arya.
Yeah, this is pretty close to an ideal start. There's not really cheap removal that Lee could have in this spot that would let him pull back. The removal he'd have it are things like the Bitter Triumph in this spot, which is trading down on mana against the Warden. So not an ideal spot.
Right, but Duelist of the Mind is gonna get in and does have vigilance, so can stay back on blocking duty as well. Lee is passing it back with the Bitter Triumph available. And Max says, I'm just gonna keep putting these 1/1s down for now.
Yeah, and I think in this spot, what Max really wants to find is some way to leverage this board. Ideally, a Knight Errant of Eos to maybe recoup some cards from spewing this whole board out, but really just anything at all that will let him leverage going wide, because currently all these like 1 and 2 power creatures aren't doing very much once the Warden is answered.
Well, that Warden is going to get answered. And looks like it's going to be Duelist gets the trigger. Lee actually paid life for that. And that trigger gives the Duelist 1 point of power, and Duelist can actually eat one of the goblins. So as you say, these 1/1s not doing a ton, but Max does have a lot of them, and if they just keep sending them at Lee's face, it seems like it's difficult for Lee to deal with that right now.
Yeah, and we did see Max top a card off the Warden of the Inner Sky Scry, so I would not be surprised to see something that really leverages the spot coming down next turn.
Okay, well, Lee's going to add to the board with an Evangel of Synthesis. Let's see what that mystery card that Max left on top was. We know about their Sundown Pass in hand. And they're going to be pitching that away, looking for another card. What was it on top? I think was it the Epicure?
Another Warden makes sense to have topped here. I mean, that's going to dig you towards yet more action.
All right, Warden of the Inner Sky.
Force yet another removal spell out of Lee.
This is a big attack. I mean, Lee's going to take 4 damage, gets to eat a 1/1, goes down to 8. And it does not take a lot for this Convoke deck to kill you from 8. If Max finds some kind of Invitane's Recruiters, that's another Scry to the top. So we could be seeing things wrapped up pretty quickly here. Lee has a Pros-Eidetic Memory. That doesn't affect the board. The Steam Core Scholar would affect the board.
Yeah, I think in lead spot you're trying to find something like a cut down to answer that warden, so maybe there's at least a little less going on. And something like an imminence recruiter or even a war leader is all quite likely to be game here.
All right, let's see what Max found. Is it a pump effect of some kind? It's Knight Errant of Eos. Okay. So Lee gets another time, at least.
Lee gets another turn, and if there isn't enough defensive play from Max here, I wouldn't be surprised to maybe even see lethal. Because that
Okay.
because that's a bunch of cards being drawn off Steam Cost Scholar. The Duelist of the Mind is going to get bigger, and then Prosthetic Memory is going to pump it a bunch. So I think currently we're looking at
Oh, and that's another crime.
6 damage. Oh, I think that might be it. I think that might actually just be
Holy
enough damage.
goodness. Okay, all right. So South Springs takes Max to 10. Duelist of the Mind is up to 3. Scholar's going to draw a couple more cards. Duelist is up to 5. And Prosthetic Memory going to put, I think that's going to be 4 plus 1 counters?
Yeah, I think this might actually just be one off of being
Oh,
lethal. Or well, two off actually. I think it might be 3 counters.
yeah, you're right. 3 counters on the Duelist. And Max goes to 2, so not quite lethal this turn, and now Max gets to untap. We know, of course, that they already have the Immidane's Recruiter in hand. Gonna use the Cavern of Souls, get that down. It's uncounterable, and this is a massive send with the team. Is there enough to block so that Lee can survive? It's just too much.
Yeah, this is much too much, I think, to be survivable for Lee. Still quite an impressive showing from the Dimir deck, showing how this version of the deck with all these raw twos is much better at applying a lot of sudden pressure, and in that way doesn't give the Convoke deck the same ability to play a long game and play slowly and go wide, because, I mean, eventually this deck is just going to kill you in the air.
Yeah, for sure. That was pretty scary. The Duelist of the Mind nearly doing it there. And let's see what things look like after sideboard. Trimming down on some of the threes and bringing in some copies of Malicious Eclipse, which of course the -2/-2 to all creatures effect from LCI, and it does exile the creatures as well. So that a nice sweeper for small things, shall we say, coming in for Lee, but not a lot of changes otherwise, Arya. And we talked about it before with Convoke, we talked about it with Simic, but this seems like another deck where you kind of need all your pieces to do the thing.
Yeah, at least in this deck, the pieces generally tend to draw cards. So that's something that means that putting all your pieces together is more of a when rather than if eventually. Lee's just going to draw the Duelist of the Mind, draw the Prosthetic Memory, because all those cards kind of draw into each other, but still very much like an A plus B plus C type of synergy deck. And does lead to the delta between the most explosive draws and the average draws being pretty big.
It's also nice, by the way, to see the ping lands from OTJ. Oh, look at this! Duress hitting the Gleeful Demolition. What a get!
Yeah, and that would have been pretty close to an ideal draw for Max, being able to demolition the token, play out a Knight Errant. I don't think there was any way Lee was really coming back from that. So Duress there. Really smart call, honestly, to play it rather than holding up creature interaction like go for the threat, recognizing that demolition, the primary way you lose a game like this.
Yeah, Lee will be so pleased to see that. Max has to regroup a little bit, but does have the clue available, has the Warden, and can even tap, I think, to put a counter on the Warden this turn. You can tap itself, right?
It can't tap itself, yeah.
Yeah. Might even be another 1-drop available.
Yeah, I think in this spot, what Max really wants to do is just find more bodies to put into play, something to let that Knight Errant get convoked out, and then leverage the card advantage and board presence that provides to close out the game pretty quickly, while Lee is still on the back foot trying to assemble his synergies that we talked about.
Okay, well, Max is leaving the card on top. Lee I'm going to get going with the Steam Core Scholar. So that's going to draw 2, discard 2. Ooh, Shieldred, the Apocalypse, and Duelist of the Mind. Both very nice finds for Lee. Has a copy of Go for the Throat as well.
Yeah, and a pretty potent combination with each other too, because having a Shieldred and a Duelist just means all your removal spells are gaining you a life, and that's pretty tough for the Convoke deck to keep up with.
Yeah, Lee, with 4 mana available this turn, yeah, I'll love to see it. Just slam that Shieldred on the battlefield.
Yeah, and uh Max missing on Knight Errant and not getting any creatures that is really tough. The deck really wants to have Knight Errant for tapping 3 creatures rather than 2, so that you can get 3 drops like Recruiter and Sanguine Evangelist. And missing entirely instead in a spot like this just puts the deck so far behind. It's really hard to keep up with the Shieldred in a spot like this in particular.
Yeah, a little bit unfortunate there for Max. Honestly, Max has not been having a good time in the feature match area in terms of variance, and it happens. Right? We've seen it happen before here. This Knight Errant, though, is doing a lot better. It found a couple of 1-drops. It found an Inspector, which is more cards. It found Epicure, and that battlefield, it's starting to fill up for Max.
Yeah, at this point, once Max finds something to leverage the going wide, like an Evidence Recruiter, they're in really good shape. It's just going to be a tough call against this Duelist plus Shieldred engine, because the removal spells are just going to find more removal spells, and at some point, the Shieldred will have applied enough pressure to Max's life total that they will be on the back foot, particularly given the Vigilant Flyers that are around.
All right, so here we go. Duelist of the Mind comes down. Go for the Throat, targeting Warden. That's going to trigger the Duelist because it is a crime. Get rid of the spare copy of Shieldred. Shieldred's going to gain some life. For drawing cards, Lee up to 23, getting in with the Scholar. And actually, it's just going to hold the Osawara, preferring to keep it back, either as a piece of interaction or maybe even to discard to one of these loot effects, Aria.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense given all the looting Lee has access to. He really just wants to make sure every spell he casts for the rest of the game is a removal spell. So I really like keeping the Ottawa on hand. Pretty tough spot to be in on Max's side, where just beating the Shieldred is really, really difficult.
Yeah, and Max is throwing away creatures here just to get in for some damage. Takes Lee down to 17. Has to draw cards and take more damage just to try and find something. There was not an answer to the Shieldred. Lithomantic Barrage took care of Mr. Nathan Stoyer that last turn, but Demolition, that's a nice fight.
Yeah, that's definitely a start to getting the board wide enough to where Lee can attack again. But yeah, given this counter spell in hand in particular, I have a hard time imagining Max really getting out of this. That Shieldred plus Steam Core Scholar is a 2-turn clock, so this is the one window Max has to have interaction. If they don't have interaction this turn, they are dead on their next upkeep. And with
Okay,
the
so
counter spell in hand,
yeah.
the game seems pretty over.
All right, let's see what Max can find here. Oh, there is a removal spell, but it's not for Shieldred. It's for the Scholar. That cannot be countered. But let's see.
It can't be countered, but I
Lee.
believe there can be a copy made of the Steam Core Scholar, and that's going to provide
Okay.
exactly the same lethal as Lee had access to before.
Oh my goodness. The second mode on 3 steps ahead. Going to make a copy. That's going to draw some more cards. Give Lee some more life to work with as well. Wow, this deck is sweet, Aria. Can I change my answer to your question?
I'll allow it.
Okay, all right. Oh gosh, Max. Yeah, things. This is really kind of locked up here for Lee. Max sending in the attacks, going down swinging, but it is going to be Lee taking down game number 2. It looks like against Boros Convoke, and the he's going to be evening things up here. This deck is sweet.
Yeah, it's interesting how this deck differs from the Dimir midrange in terms of the ways it plays, where this deck really leverages Shieldred. Like, Shieldred gained like 10, 15 life that last game, and those synergies definitely allow this deck to turn the corner a lot quicker than traditional Dimir decks do, at the cost of maybe having a little less interaction and playing a midrange game a little worse.
All right, that opening hand with the 3 malicious eclipses is not good enough. Lee is going to be going down to 6, but this is a nice one. Harrier, Strix, Steals in the Mind, Cut Down, and Duress. Some interaction, some threats here for Lee. And Max, I think, on the 7, it looks like. So, oh no, I take that back. Max on the Molotov 5. Really unfortunate here for them. And gets off to a good start, though, with the Epicure on 1.
Yeah, and it's a multi-5 tough spot unless there's a Gleeful Demolition, and then all of a sudden, it doesn't matter there's a multi-5. This hand is really, really strong.
All right, Gleeful Demolition. No Knight on turn 2 to back up, but still has 4 power on 4 bodies on the battlefield. And Lee is just going to be adding an 0-3 for now.
Yeah, and now it's all about what follow-up Max has in hand. They really just need something to leverage this sideboard in case of the Gateway Express, Wally the Skull, Imidane's Recruiter, just something. Any of those cards, and they're pretty solidly ahead.
Okay, well, Novice Spectre is not one of those cards, but is going to help Max find one of those cards. So Max on that mulligan to 5 with the dominating board presence, Lee really digging with the Steam Core Scholar. Would love to see one of those copies of Malicious Eclipse right now, Aria.
Yeah, I mean, a board wipe at this spot would basically end the game, given the 1 card Max has in hand. But even a 2/2 blocker is pretty tough for Max, because just throwing cards into blocker is not ideal, given how much of a critical mass deck this is.
Well, it is going to be throwing creatures into blockers. Oh, was that another Gleeful Demolition?
That was yet another Gleeful Demolition. Throwing things into blockers, admittedly, a little less of an issue when you have 8 creatures in play.
Yeah, Max, they have quite a few goblins to spare, for sure. And meanwhile, the cut down that could deal with something, bit of triumph. Like, it's just not where you want to be with these 1-for-1 removal spells. And he's going to go digging with Prost in Eidetic Memory and see whether he can find something that is a little bit more powerful than that.
Yeah, I think at this point, it's really a Malicious Eclipse or maybe a Shieldred that Lee wants to find. Anything short of that is unlikely to cut it.
Okay, Max is getting in. Oh, more 1/1s. Oh, Lee's down to just 4 life. That is not a Malicious Eclipse. Evangel could be a redraw here for Lee.
Yeah, notably, we talked about how this Convoke deck is a critical mass deck, and all those Shump attacks make this spot actually not as good for Max anymore, where we're looking at now 3 different creatures that all block and eat everything Max has, a bunch of removal spells, and unless there's something like an Imidane's Recruiter or maybe like a Wall Leader Skull coming, I think I'm back to thinking Lee's in a pretty good spot. Or at least a salvageable one.
Right. There's 2 removal spells, 3 blockers, and 7 creatures on the other side of the battlefield. Sanguine Evangelist. That's a big find for Max, who doesn't get the battle cry this turn. Yeah, let's see. Lee is going to deal with some of the threats on board that can attack. But that battle cry next turn seems to be really difficult.
Battle cry on the Evangelist definitely could be backbreaking. Also, paying a life to cut something down, really tough in this spot. But Leader 1, I believe. turns off colored mana from Underground River.
Hello? Shieldred?
Yeah, I mean, Shieldred
Okay.
does mean that's not lethal this turn. There's 2 blockers in the air, 4 blockers total. Max needs one of something, anything this turn. But if sorry, just Max needs one of something this turn. If they don't find it, then Shieldred probably going to stabilize, particularly in conjunction with that Harrier Strix to draw extra cards.
Okay, all right. Max goes down to 8, by the way. Has been taking quite a lot of damage from these Steam Core Scholar kind of attacks. Battle Cry sending with the team. Max really trying to find a way through Leah with just 1 life. Oh my goodness. Well, Darren, Epicure would do it. Any number of burn spells, but nope. And now Lee gets to start gaining that life back, and it's going to be lethal on the crackback with Shieldred stabilizing things here for Lee, and Max almost got there on the mulligan to 5. What an incredible game between these two players. Ultimately, Lee Matthews with Dimir Midrange taking this one down, beating Max on Boros Convoke. Great stuff there from deck, and the vigilance on these flyers made all the difference.
Yeah, pretty key part of what let the deck tick there. Being able to apply pressure while also having defensive creatures really important in matchups like this. Prevents Convoke from going for the I will just build a board presence infinitely game plan before eventually killing you. Means that, both players need to be cognizant of life totals. Attacking is a very real path to winning the game. And so Vigilance just really strong against Convoke's game plan of putting out a bunch of small creatures that most of your creatures can eat in combat.
All right. Well, that was some good stuff there from Lee with Dimir Midrange. We have more Magic to bring you. Last feature match, I think, from round number. And let's go down to the action. We are in game number 3, the decider here between Alexander Nguyen and Miguel Boros. And Miguel maybe suffering a little bit from mana problems again, but is able to get down the Wandering Emperor against Alexander, who is on Dimir control, it looks like. And, there just goes to show there are so many different ways you can build every color combination in this format. And Alexander firing up the Restless Reef, that's going to take care of the Wandering Emperor and do a bit of milling as well.
Yeah, these control matchups, again, kind of in a similar spot to the last one we talked about, where just playing a non-blue control deck into blue control is just pretty difficult for... It's just a really difficult spot thanks to Memory Deluge specifically. It's just really hard to keep up with the card advantage that the blue control decks have, and part of the way that manifests is just really reliably making your land drops.
Right. Well, it is night, so there must have been a previous kind of graveyard trespasser or something from Miguel, because it is nighttime. Graveyard Glutton comes down, gets to at least take care of one of the Memory Deluges in the graveyard, and another card, I think Tishana's Tidebinder, to do some pinging as well. But this time is Alexander with the outrageous robbery, and Liliana switching sides yet again, Arya.
Yeah, and we get to see that same thing we saw last time around, which is another thing these control decks do is have all these have very few creatures and lean on other things to win, and really pressure your opponent with their inability to have good targets for their removal that they're somewhat forced to leave in anyway, and just getting a lot of virtual card advantage that way.
Is there a virtue of card advantage?
Well, I mean, card advantage is a virtue. You already know this. I feel like I don't need to sell you on it.
That's fair. That's fair. I do agree. So, Alexander, with Liliana of the Veil active, we saw Miguel find Kutzel's Flanker, by the way, which nice little 3-1 with Flash. You can make it bigger, you can gain some life, or you can exile a graveyard. So that a nice instant speed threat for Miguel, who also is going to be using some of these removal spells to take care of that knight. And I don't think Alexander can cast the. Can Alexander cast the backside of Batu?
Well, there's one white land in play, which is a Caves of Kylos off the outrageous robbery. So if if the last card exiled with robbery is yet another white land, then we could see it. But otherwise, I expect the Virtue to be hanging out in the adventure zone for quite a while.
Okay, well, Kutz's flanker's coming down, and Miguel's having a look at this unlicensed us, thinking, do I need this card? There's not a lot of memory deluges left. Looks like, and honestly, like Miguel, Aria, what is Miguel looking for here? Like in terms of what would he want for his strategy?
I think you just want threats that can somewhat snowball and interact favorably with one-for-one removal. So something like the Wandering Emperor would be really good. Unlicensed Sets is pretty good too because it's a threat that doesn't leave itself vulnerable to sorcery speed removal until you want to attack with it. And then I wouldn't be surprised to see more things like Outrageous Robbery, maybe the Eternal Wanderer being things that over the course of this game Miguel wants to get into play.
Okay, well, unlicensed class is going to come down. As you said, it can just sit there. It can get bigger. Miguel's not really under any threat right now, and that is just going to be growing and growing and growing. But Alexander does have the Restless Reef on the battlefield, another kind of removal resistant threat area.
Yeah, and I mean reef in particular can be pretty obnoxious because not only is it removal resistant against sorcery speed removal, it's just really tough to have a stat line that blocks well against it. Death Touch on in particular punishes double blocks, and with a creature that size, when Miguel's deck is almost entirely small creatures, double blocks are kind of the only way you can kill it in the first place.
Right. Oh, and just another land for Miguel. That's not going to be helping him very much against active Liliana of the Veil, and he just has to pass the turn back. Alexander really looking to close things up here, Arya, with that land.
Yeah, probably a sign for Miguel that Alexander's hand doesn't have very much going on because he chose to optic Liliana and discard a card, despite Miguel not having any cards in hand, just to put that extra loyalty on Liliana, presumably because he assumes the cards in his hand won't matter very much.
That makes a lot of sense. Here comes another card. That's the last one off the robbery, and it is the Tenacious Underdog. So a little. I mean, that one, stealing that off the robbery, not as good as when it dies. Of course, it is going to go to Miguel's graveyard. But, oh, Mirax, that does make bodies, but those bodies do not block, Arya.
Yeah, and playing at the underdog, there's something of a risky proposition from Alexander. It might look strange that he didn't play it on a previous turn, but at that point, Miguel was at a high enough life total that if he had a removal spell for the underdog, getting access to that blitz out of the graveyard once the underdog goes to his graveyard after dying would have been pretty big. But now that Miguel is at a lower life total, Alexander realizes there's not much of an issue anymore, and so makes a pretty heads-up play of playing out the underdog, recognizing that it dying is not actually a big deal.
So Miguel is going to make a Murex token. I'm going to keep going with the hearse, and Miguel could actually just make another token to crew the hearse, and that would be a 6/6 available, and a Corsic Bronco the find as well. And Arya, these Murex tokens also doing a pretty good job of defending against that Liliana Edict effect. So actually, this Murex doing more work than I thought, even from behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's just generating board presence is so important in these matchups. So really like what it's doing here for Miguel. Like you said, even in a board where you're playing from behind.
I'm just excited that we might get to see a Liliana ultimate.
The chances are looking pretty good for that, to be sure.
So that Restless Reef, I think, is a 6/6 right now. Which, for the keen-eyed amongst you, is the size of the unlicensed her. So that would be a straight-up trade. Of course, it does have Death Touch. And yeah, Alexander's going to pump the brakes on. Doesn't want to trade off that Restless Reef, maybe looking for something like instant speed removal to kind of clear the way. And Miguel's going to start pumping out more tokens. It is not over yet between these two decks. Wedding Announcement off the top. Surely that's one of the best finds that Miguel could have.
Yeah, Wedding Announcement, one of the better draws. Unfortunately for Miguel, there's not really a way to attack into this Liliana well. And so Liliana ult very likely to happen next turn, and also going to be pretty tough to beat for Miguel.
Okay, so Miguel is going to be crewing the hearse, sending both out Liliana. Finds a land of the Bronco. That's at least not going to take any damage from that one. Reef eats the Bronco. Underdog jumps in front of her. So Liliana is going to live. Alex is left with just the Restless Reef. And honestly, Arya, I can definitely see the desire here, because if you attack with two creatures with that Wedding Announcement, you get to do some you get to draw some cards, and Miguel really, I think, hoping to refill that hand.
Yeah, it's just a pretty tough spot against Liliana Ultimate. That was the only attack that meant properly threatened Liliana. But over here, there's like some pretty brutal splits that Alexander can set up, where Miguel can be forced to choose between things that actually block, like the announcement and the announcement and unlicensed, or all of his lands, for example.
Oh my goodness. Okay, Liliana Ultimate. I mean, I did not have this on my bingo card for today, but always exciting to see it happen. And always exciting, always a possibility when Liliana is in standard. So let's see what the piles Alexander chooses are. Some of those lands, you've got to imagine at least that a bunch of those lands are going away. So it's going to be split up the hearse in the announcement. 4 lands on one side, 3 lands on the other side. So pretty evenly split on these piles. And Miguel choosing to sacrifice that hearse and keep the Wedding Announcement there, Arya.
Yeah, and playing from behind just all the more harder when there's not just not more lands to play on multiple threats or blockers in a turn. So tough spot for Miguel, particularly because that was a second white land, that Sunken Citadel that Alexander just played is a second white land. So now that Virtue is playable, and that's going to start generating a lot of value.
Okay, all right. Sunken Citadel coming down for Alexander. Does get to make a white mana, and Miguel's going to be getting in with this underdog. That leaves Wedding Announcement to make a 1/1, which can jump in front of the Reef. Underdog is going to be drawing a card. I kind of love this. Miguel using his life total as a resource, trying to find a way to get out of this and kind of come back from that Liliana Ultimate. Not many people come back from a Liliana Ultimate, let me tell you that.
Yeah, I really like that play there from Miguel, recognizing that what he really needs is just more resources to be able to play the game at all, and doesn't have that at the moment. So it makes sense to blitz the doggo.
Okay, that is not a doggo.
It's underdog. It's in the name.
No, it's not a dog. Yeah, it may be an underdog, but it's not a doggo. Does not qualify. And Get Lost was the find for Miguel. So he can actually play out an underdog. Announcer's going to flip, has removal for the Restless Reef. All of a sudden, things might be turning the corner here. Maybe.
Yeah, I think this is actually a pretty decent spot for Miguel with that removal for the Restless Reef. It, at the very least, he's definitely still in it.
Right. And that I think he would probably not have kind of imagined, there's 2 Restless Reefs.
Oh, there's 2 Restless Reefs.
being in it. Right, but he's also still not dead to that.
Yes, though he would be dead to a removal spell here.
Because
well, not quite dead to a removal spell here, but would go to would be going to 2 off a removal spell, which I think is pretty risky given it shuts off the underdogs in the graveyard.
Right, understood. We also have to keep an eye on Miguel's library, by the way. Is that 4 cards?
4 is not a lot of cards.
That's not a lot of cards. I'm not sure that Miguel can't even let another Restless Reef attack. So that, I think, explains a lot as to what was going on in his mind there. But he has a removal.
Yeah, I'm mostly worried about him being at 2 life, so can't blitz underdogs, and meaning that he might just not be able to win the game.
But Arya, the flanker can gain 2 life.
Oh, that's true. That maybe buys him a little more time to be able to attack, but it's still a pretty worrying spot in terms of being able to actually win the game before he runs out of cards in library.
All right, well, Miguel definitely has his back against the wall here. Gets the flanker down. That's a 4-2. Gain 2 life, scry 2. Look at 2/3 of the remaining cards in the library. Yeah, that's right. I can do some maths. And oh no, doesn't get to do that at all because Tishana's Tidebinder.
Yeah. And I think at this point the game's pretty dependent on what Alexander has in hand. If he has a single piece of interaction, it's hard to imagine this going well. But if it's just a bunch of lands, then it's still within range for Miguel to find a way to win this game.
Okay, 2 cards in the library. Alexander has to have absolutely nothing, doesn't have absolutely nothing, has go for the throat.
Yeah,
Miguel's 1 more turn. Okay. What does that do?
I think it does not quite enough in this spot. I don't think there's anything in Alexander's deck that is getting Miguel out of this tight spot.
I'm just thinking if Miguel can find a Restless Reef, but that would need a blue mana to activate it. Yeah, it just doesn't seem like there's going to be enough. Oh, and Alexander found another Restless Reef himself.
Yeah, this seems pretty over.
So Miguel would have to hit exactly a removal spell. X equals 2. Is that a treasure?
I think that's a clue, so it has to be X equal to 1.
Okay, well, Deduce is not a removal spell, so it does seem like it is over here. Alexander will be able to mill that last card. Miguel says, no, I will draw that last card before I let you mill it. This is lethal in multiple ways here for Alexander, and it is going to be Dimir Control taking this one down against Orzhov in the hands of Miguel, and all off the back of those Restless Reefs, Arya.
Yeah. Very impressive performance from that card, and yet another different type of control that's viable in this format, with, again, plays pretty differently from the Orzhov and Azorius control decks we saw. So pretty impressive performance, really well played, and novel and interesting deck.
Yeah, great stuff there from both of our players. All right.